Big Ben with a big win, but he needed a little help from his friend. Hi guys, Lauren Shehadi alongside senior fantasy football writer Jamey Eisenberg on Hot and Not. Big Ben and the Steelers, they beat the Washington Redskins in the nation's capital, but some news under center there.
Yeah, you okay with the loss?
I'm still getting over it.
All right, no problem. They'll bounce back. I think when you look at what's going on with Ben Roethlisberger, obviously he missed the second half with a right shoulder injury, right arm injury. I think they're going to be pretty close to the vest with what exactly is going on. Coach Mike Tomlin said Tuesday that he's day-to-day, so he's expected to play as of now, but that's something obviously you'll want to check with CBSSports.com, and we'll have all throughout the week on Ben Roethlisberger's status. My guess is, facing the Colts, Lauren, they have a very poor run defense, so they're probably going to just, if Big Ben is in there, he's probably going to be handing off a lot. I wouldn't count on him as a #1 fantasy option this week, but Byron Leftwich played well in replacing Roethlisberger, so if he does have to start there, you probably won't see the Steelers miss much of a beat.
Okay, well, speaking of quarterbacks, everyone has a bad day. Everyone. Oh, except for you. On your fantasy advice, you never have a bad day, do you? Speaking of McNabb and Manning, they've had bad days. I think what fantasy owners want to know is how many more will they have?
Yeah, these guys are chasing Kurt Warner, as you see in the graphic here, but when you look at Peyton Manning, big disappointment so far based on where he was drafted and what you expect of him coming into the season. Donovan McNabb has been sort of hit or miss, but both guys coming off great games. I think you have to start them, obviously, every week, even if you have good backups, because they're capable of games like this. The interesting thing is, which we'll get into with roster trends, is so many injuries at quarterback, not just Ben Roethlisberger, but so many quarterbacks are out right now. I think you see that these two guys, that if you have them on your fantasy team, you should be really lucky because you have two elite guys that are going to continue to throw. The thing about Peyton Manning that we liked in Week 9 was getting Anthony Gonzalez involved. So another option on the field that he's involving, getting him the ball, and that's just going to open things up for him. And then Donovan McNabb, Kevin Curtis is back, Reggie Brown is back. Hopefully we'll see L.J. Smith coming back. But Brent Selleck, he came out of nowhere, the tight end for the Eagles, and just another option for McNabb to throw to. He's using his legs more. So both these guys are going to be great. Kurt Warner, as we already talked about, probably the MVP in terms of quarterbacks at this point right now.
Well, those are kind of the mainstays at quarterback. What about guys like Joe Flacco and Matt Ryan? Are these the new studs, emerging quarterbacks?
They are. They're coming up at this point. When you talk about these two rookie quarterbacks, I think you could see that Matt Ryan for sure can be started in terms of fantasy teams because, again, with all the injuries at quarterback, he's averaging 248 passing yards with 7 touchdowns, 3 interceptions in his past 4 games, has just really taken the next step in developing. We haven't seen a rookie quarterback play like this maybe since Peyton Manning in terms of fantasy production, or even going back to the 1980s with Dan Marino. You talk about Matt Ryan, he's getting Roddy White involved, Michael Jenkins involved. Just really opening up the field there and taking advantage of that strong running game. Joe Flacco has come on recently the last 3 games playing well. Not the same opportunities with the weapons there because Todd Heap has been non-existent. Mark Clayton had a nice touchdown. Derek Mason's a good possession receiver, but these aren't over-the-top playmakers that Joe Flacco is dealing with. I spoke to Phil Simms a couple weeks ago, and this was after Matt Ryan's really, couple good breakout games. Sure. And Simms said, maybe in 3 years from now we'll be talking about Joe Flacco. It could happen sooner than later. The way that these two young quarterbacks are playing, we could be talking about the next future quarterbacks for fantasy users. And again, right now you can use both these guys in Week 10. You
can use these rookies as quarterbacks. What about the rookie running backs? Tim Hightower, now really the man in the desert for Edgerrin James. He's not seeing playing time at all.
Yeah, absolutely. It's been fantastic to see that develop, and Tim Hightower has been better than James in terms of fantasy production. But all these rookie running backs, we don't have Chris Johnson on this list also, but he was fantastic in Week 9 also. With Steve Slayton playing against a tough Vikings defense and getting it done in the passing game. Matt Forte is really going to have to shoulder the load now that Kyle Orton is out. Rex Grossman now the starting quarterback for the Bears with Orton dealing with the ankle injury. So Forte is going to see even more carries, more touches, being thrown to him out of the backfield. So you look at all 3 of these guys, they were sort of marginal starters, and I think you look at them depending on who else you have on your fantasy team. But now with Hightower coming into the mix, and also Ryan Terrain expected to start now for the Broncos with Michael Pittman and Andre Hall on injury reserve, the rookie running back class has just been fantastic, and fantasy owners have reaped the benefit.
Jamey, when you were talking about marginal starters, is Brett Favre a marginal starter? He should get a break with the Rams defense, really. He needs a break at this point.
He absolutely needs a break. You talk about Brett Favre and what he's been playing, like 7 straight games with an interception. He has 8 interceptions in his last 4 games. He's not getting the job done, at least from what the Jets' perspective hoped for. You talk about prior to the season, Chad Pennington for Brett Favre seemed like a no-brainer, but Chad Pennington has not only been better for the Dolphins, he's been better for fantasy owners. So Brett Favre is just continuing to struggle right now. He sort of falls in line. You mentioned marginal starters, Lauren. That's a great way to describe it because can you trust him each week as a fantasy owner? And I think this is a great week to sort of see how we'll do because the Jets at home against the Rams, That's a poor pass defense. We saw Kurt Warner, which is why he was on the graphic previously. Kurt Warner ate up that Rams pass defense. I think Favre has an opportunity to do the same thing, but if you don't have a better option on your bench, then you start him. If you do have a better option, let's say a Matt Ryan, then I think you may go with Matt Ryan because facing New Orleans, I might like that option a little bit better.
Okay, marginal stats. What about Coles? His worst statistical performance since week 1.
Yeah, the receivers I think have still been okay. You know, you talk about Coles and Kotri, those two guys. You still want to start them because they're not throwing interceptions. They're not fumbling the ball. They're not going to have huge games if Favre continues to play like this, as what happened with Coles this past week. But I still think you have to start those guys week in, week out, just because, again, their potential. And, again, if Favre's throwing interceptions is hurting Favre, he's not necessarily hurting the two receivers there.
Well, when you're talking about stats, you want to talk about T.O. Not bad stats, considering the circumstance with under center in Dallas, really.
Yes, he did score a touchdown, first time in 3 games. But the thing about T.O. that you have to keep in mind is not getting it done in terms of the overall production from where you drafted him in the first round or early in the second round. He will bounce back. He's been a second-half performer his entire career, his entire situation since he's been in Dallas. 2006, he came in with 5 touchdowns through 7 games. He finished with 13. 2007, 5 touchdowns through 7 games. He finished with 15. He's got 6 touchdowns now through 9 games. I think you'll see him continue to pick it up after the bye week. Once Tony Romo's under center, that'll be the biggest thing for him because getting it done with Brad Johnson, Brooks Bollinger, that's not necessarily going to happen week in, week out.
All things change when Tony Romo comes back.
Yes.
Thanks, Jamey. And
My
thank
pleasure.
you for tuning in. If you need lineup changes, inactives, actives, turn to Fantasy Football Today live every Sunday, 11 o'clock with Jason Horowitz. Good luck, guys. See you later.